just to kind of gain a deeper understanding into like what that spirit actually represents, and the very sort of apprehension that comes from working with that, especially coming from like a Judeo-Christian background. I think is a type of spiritual shadow work in a way to come to a deeper understanding with these forces, that have been given all these negative connotations throughout history, but we don't really realize what is actually there until we approach it on a very personal, face-to-face level. And that's really kind of parallel to working with the plants of the poison path as well. You don't understand all of these different energies and entities until you come into a one-on-one relationship with them.
Hello, and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. In this episode of Spirit Box, I'm joined by plant magic practitioner Coby Michael, author of the Poison Path Grimoire. We explore the strange, intoxicating world of poisonous and psychoactive plants, their history, their spirits, and their place in witchcraft and dark herbalism. Coby shares how his work with these plants led him to classify them into Saturnian, Mercurial, and Venusian types, each carrying its own current of power: the baneful, chthonic, the entheogenic, the Mercurial, the seductive, and the Venusian. We talk about how these correspondences are merged through practice and research, and how he incorporates glyphs, runes, and ritual into his work. Our conversation also turns to the wild, generative forces of nature, the trickster currents linked to Pan and Dionysius, that challenge order and offer paths of transformation. We look at the way these energies surface in borderlands, wilderness, and even in the chaos of cities. Coby speaks openly about his own healing journey and recovery from opioid addiction, and how plant spirits such as belladonna became unlikely allies in that process, echoing their forgotten role in medicine and ritual. It's a rich and far-reaching discussion, one that moves between folklore, plant-spirit communication, vampiric herbs, and the strange balance between poison and healing. Enjoy. Coby Michael, you are very welcome to the Spirit Box. Lovely to have you on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
A pleasure. So to get the show started and help orientate people, could you tell them a little bit about yourself and your new book, The Poison Path Grimoire?
Yeah, so my name is Coby. I am a plant magic practitioner based out of St. Petersburg, Florida. I have a focus on poisonous and psychoactive plants, their ritual and ceremonial uses, and just recently had a book come out this past November called The Poison Path Grimoire. That is my second book on the topic. I've got another one that'll be coming out later, spring 2026.
Oh, cool. That's great. Can I ask, what drew you to kind of these baneful plants in the first place? Where did your interest start?
Well, I've always been interested in plants in general, not only growing them, but their medicinal properties, their folklore, their magical correspondences, and poisonous plants just really drew me in. They kind of seem to represent and contain all of the different aspects of witchcraft that I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So spirit flight, familiar spirits, pacts with the devil, all of the kind of more nefarious side of things. So they really kind of told the story of, traditional witchcraft, air quotes, or like classical witchcraft going all the way back to antiquity. And that was something that I really resonated with, that I wasn't finding among the more contemporary works on non-baneful plants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what was the goal that you wanted to kind of, I guess, or the message you wanted to communicate with this book?
With this book in particular, it was more focused on looking at the idea of dark herbalism, what all that implies as far as working with plants that are known for having a little bit more of a dark side, and specifically investigating the concept of poison and how it has kind of evolved throughout human history, and all of the different things that that idea sort of represents, from actual poisonous substances
Hmm.
to being used to describe people and scenarios, and kind of tapping into it more as a broader concept that represents this energy, that we can tap into and direct with our will. It's an energy that we can sense when we are in certain situations or around certain people. So, kind of exploring that a little bit more in depth too.
Hmm.
When the book came out, it was actually happened to be released the day after our most recent election here in the United States. So when Trump got reelected, um, and there was a lot of like women's rights things going on. So the timing was really kind of profound because it's essentially a battle cry against all of that, poison the patriarchy and exploring all of these different feminine figures throughout history and mythology that are associated with poison and, poison magic and lore, and how
Hmm.
they sort of go against that current.
Hmm. I really enjoyed that section of the book where you kind of give context, a magical and historical context for poison as a tool. I think it sets up the later sections where you go through kind of each poison and the qualities and the approach and the nature of the spirits. But then I found that I, I I really enjoyed that context that sort of framed the book really well. As a lover of plants and growing food and herbs and all that kind of stuff, it was I thought you landed that very well. Um, could you give the listeners a little bit of that history of poison?
Well, poison, I think, has been with us since, prehistoric times, before we really had an understanding or words to even kind of communicate what it actually was. When we go back to like hunter gatherer time period, using, poison to enhance our weaponry, to make hunting more effective, and then kind of moving more into like the classical period, the understanding of poison in ancient Greece was a little bit different than
Hmm.
what it is today. Poison being a very much a black and white kind of term used to describe a number of different plants and substances with a very like broad range of effects. But like modern people, when they hear the word poison, most of the time it's a very fear-based reaction, just to kind of like stay away, and there's
Yeah.
nothing beneficial to be gained from that. But the Greeks called it pharmakon. So it was the understanding of these plants that were simultaneously medicinal, potentially poisonous or potent, and then also had some kind of a magical aspect to it too, through its entheogenic effects.
Thank you. And was it you mentioned in the book, is it Odysseus poisoned his arrows for better effect, and that Hercules was the first to poison his arrows?
Yeah, mythologically, that's kind of where they trace the whole origin story of poisoned arrows
Yeah.
to. It's through Hercules slaying the Hydra, and then he dips his arrows in the Hydra venom, and it's where poison arrows come from.
So cool. I love that. Um, and when you started out um, in your journey, in your particular path in magic, where did magic lead you to the plants first, or was it the other way around, or was it just always kind of a coupling?
It's really hard to kind of trace the original origin for
Yeah.
either one of those, like which one goes back further. I think that before I even started a serious magical practice or showed an interest in
Hmm.
magic of the spiritual sort, I was always kind of enchanted by plants.
Hmm.
And I think that, that was a very magical experience before I was even able to articulate what was happening. Just this affinity and this communication. So I grew up like in the garden with my grandparents, planting a lot of
Hmm.
things and just being very interested in the whole growth cycle, the life cycle of the plants. And then that went into, medicinal properties, natural alternatives, just kind of branched out from there. But they've always been kind of a simultaneous two parallels running throughout the course of my life.
Right, right. And so when you started kind of going down this path, exploring kind of the baneful aspect of herbs, um, was there a particular experience or plant that you were drawn to that you first kind of went into the dark side of of, of this particular area?
Yeah, the very first one that really called out was Deadly Nightshade or Atropa belladonna.
Right.
I think it drew me in for a number of different reasons. I feel like Deadly Nightshade in particular is one of the quintessential sort of herbs associated with witchcraft. So not only do we have like the diabolic associations with it being the devil's favorite plant,
Okay.
also being one of the main ingredients in the witch's flying ointment. We've also got different aphrodisiac uses, beautification preparations that incorporate deadly nightshade. So kind of simultaneously had this very dark and sinister malefic side, but then also this very kind of seductive Venusian side. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I just really resonated with that. I think that we are drawn to particular plants that share an affinity for whatever our energetic makeup kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where mine was at the time.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And you break the book up into kind of a number of different sections. And you just mentioned kind of Venusian, but you've also you explore kind of the Saturnian, the Mercurial,
Mhm.
in the book, which is why I think it's a very practical book as well. Like you can really kind of take something away and kind of immediately take an action and explore um, some of the plants that you describe in those categories. Which again, I find I really enjoyed that kind of balance of historical context, magical context, and then practical execution. You don't always get that in books. It's usually kind of lean one way or the other. So it's just a comment of appreciation, really.
Well,
um,
thank you. That means a lot.
you mentioned the kind of the devil's plant there, and you break down a number of different plants that are related to the folkloric devil, to the devil of the witches. You discuss Cain being the first farmer in places. Can you just describe the relationship between the devil and plants?
I think for me, it's kind of that wild and generative force that exists in nature. That constant kind of
Mm-hmm.
push for the natural world to reclaim what is rightfully
Mm-hmm.
theirs or its.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a trickster spirit. It's kind of anti-law, anti-order, anti-society,
Mm-hmm.
very anarchistic, I guess,
Wild.
in its energy. So yeah, a very powerful
Mm-hmm.
force to kind of tap into to help break through different, societal constructs and constraints that we put on ourselves living in a modern world.
Mm-hmm.
We equate it to sort of the folkloric devil, but we could see parallels in, like the god Pan or Dionysius
Mm-hmm.
or sort of these other revelrous nature spirits that just embody that very feral, ecstatic side of us that still exists, that we can reconnect with when we reconnect with the land.
Hmm. Yeah, that resonates an awful lot. I think it's something that people don't often um, put those things together when they think about. I mean, the devil more broadly, is still seen very much in that kind of Abrahamic framing,
Mhm.
and kind of the description you gave there would very much marry with my understanding, my take as well. That it's almost like is the dark daemon of nature itself, and it reminds us that we're part of nature, reminds us of the wildness that is in us, and help bring that to the fore. Um, and yeah, it's something that I found as well, kind of reading through the book, that contact or ritual to work with that spirit, is one we find the background is often in the wild, not always, but it seems to be happen more frequently in places that are a bit more near the borderlands between civilization and the wild, if not in the wild. And I think that there may be a reason for that. You touched on that a bit around the
Yeah,
crossroads.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an important spirit or energy for people to work with, whether it's something that becomes a permanent part of your practice, or just to kind of gain a deeper understanding into like what that spirit actually represents, and the very sort of apprehension that comes from working with that, especially coming from like a Judeo-Christian background. I think is a type of spiritual shadow work in a way to come to a deeper understanding with these forces, that have been given all these negative connotations throughout history, but we don't really realize what is actually there until we approach it on a very personal face-to-face level. And that's really kind of parallel to working with the plants of the poison path as well. You don't understand all of these different energies and entities until you come into a one-on-one relationship with them.
Yeah, yeah. And can you describe that for people listening who may not be experienced in working with plants in this way at all? How does that happen, or what does that experience feel like?
Well, I feel like it's a very slow process. They're not necessarily quick to divulge their information. I think that might be part of their Saturnian nature. Saturn being all about persistence and slow, hard work, long-term results, but things that don't necessarily happen overnight. I think that any poison path practitioner or person interested in working with poisonous plants kind of goes through the same process where there is like this level of instinctual fear or apprehension as far as like, well, how can I work with this plant? What's going to happen if I do this? What's going to happen if I do that? And, it just kind of goes back to poison becoming this very broad, vague umbrella term that gets applied to a variety of different plants with different chemical actions and different levels of safety. And poison doesn't always ultimately mean death. A lot of times that's not the case, even with things like datura and deadly nightshade, that it's a very broad spectrum
Hmm.
of different ways of safely working with them. So it's sort of like dipping your toe in and initially crossing that threshold, where you're like, oh, okay, that wasn't this super dramatic life and death experience because I brushed up against my deadly nightshade plant that I've been growing. So it's just sort of through exposure and experimentation, you're able to form a deeper relationship with them, just through that one-on-one understanding.
Mm-hmm. And from a practical perspective, like, what are the skills that people in the broadest sense kind of need to I guess understand and get basic capability with to work with these plants? Like, are we distilling things? Is there an alchemical process, or is it as simple as drying a herb and making a tea from it?
Yes to all of that. And, the first thing to remember is that some people are just naturally extremely sensitive to coming into contact with any kind of fresh plant material.
Right.
We get rashes, breakouts, different things like that. And I think that it's likely that those more sensitive individuals would have more intense reactions to not only the poisonous plants, but other non-poisonous plants as well. So there's that kind of natural sensitivity there. Luckily, I don't have that. So I'm like constantly handling things and doing just fine. But some people are just very naturally sensitive. Second most important thing is probably just not to put things in your mouth, because that's a whole different ball game.
Right.
From coming into contact, just growing a plant or harvesting it, or through application of different topical formulas. Essentially working with these herbs is just like working with any other herb. So your kind of basic herbalist skills, making oil infusions, making tinctures, making flower essences, all of that applies to the plants of the poison path too. It's just going to be at lower dosages.
Mm-hmm.
So in like clinical herbalism, they're not referred to as poisonous plants. They're referred to as low dose herbs.
Right.
So the formulation is a little bit different.
Right.
The method of application is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Intriguing. I am a number of years ago. I really wanted to make some mugwort tea, and for dream work. So I purchased some mugwort seeds from eBay and grew them, and it turned out to be a form of like tarragon that I was growing. I was very disappointed. But then I found out there was literally bushes of mugwort just growing around the corner from my house, like proper wild mugwort. Like,
yeah,
and the reason I mentioned that is it's just there's you talk about a lot of kind of like plants that some people may not be familiar with. Well, you talk about lots of plants that are kind of widely available, around us, which I really value. So there's a certain amount of kind of just going out there and looking. I mean, you talk about bramble and blackberry and those kinds of plants as well as kind of some of the more lesser known plants. And I think it's quite interesting for us as moderns, because when we think about potent plants, we always kind of, I guess, think of them as being exotic. There's a certain element of that when actually it's hyper local. They're right here.
Yeah, you think like the common nightshades, like bittersweet nightshade, black nightshade, those grow all over the place, all over the world. You've probably walked past it a million different times. Yeah, not necessarily exotic plants. And, to tap into a lot of these energies too, you don't necessarily have to go to the extreme poisonous end of the spectrum. Like I mentioned in the book, blackberry, bramble, even rose has a lot of these kind of baneful qualities too. When we get into like the chemically active plants or plants used for entheogenic purposes, it doesn't always have to be this like brain blasting experience where you go on a 36-hour long trip. stuff like mugwort and wormwood is
Yeah.
just as applicable in
Hmm.
that kind of practice.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think if we could circle back a little bit to how you the kind of the three books that you have in within your book of like the book of Saturn, the book of Venus, the book of Mercury. Can you take us through those sections and what they're about?
Yeah, so that was just kind of something that I guess I sort of tapped into when I was doing all of this research, that I started to notice these three main patterns kind of emerge. Because when we think about plants and their magical correspondences, we tend to like to box them in in terms of, this plant is ruled by the sun, this plant is ruled by the moon, this plant is ruled by Mercury. But the poisonous plants are very much shapeshifters, and they kind of manifest multiple different qualities at any given time. But kind of the main three were Saturn, Venus, and Mercury. So I associate Saturn with the witch father, the folkloric devil, Lord of Misrule, the witch's Sabbath, and kind of associated to more of the baneful aspects of poison plant work. Um, Necromancy, hexing,
Hmm.
underworld travel, that sort of thing. Then we come to Venus, who represents the witch queen, the fairy queen, Hecate, et cetera, et cetera, and sort of the more aphrodisiac aspects, the more Venusian aspects of a lot of these poisonous plants, because for a very long time, especially plants in the nightshade family, and even in still in some places today, are known more for their uses as aphrodisiacs than they are necessarily as poisons.
Right.
So kind of that more seductive and glamorous side of it. And then we come to Mercury, which is kind of the Luciferian divine child of those two other points of the triangle, that represents the more entheogenic use, the spirit flight, the upper world journeys, underworld journeys, and that sort of thing. So I
Mhm.
use that to kind of categorize not so much the plants in each section, because there is a lot of overlap, but to kind of demonstrate the different paths that one can take on the poison path. Um,
Right.
so that's where the three ways come from. And then, kind of ironically, and I didn't plan it this way, but now that I've done three books, each book kind of fits into one of those
I
three
see.
planetary
Yeah.
categories.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Well, it makes a lot of sense. Um, and yeah, I think it works. How do runes come into this?
Um, I think that's just a little bit more of my personal practice.
Right.
So with writing these books, just trying to give people a little bit more to chew on, give them more inspiration for different ways that we can incorporate these plants into our own practices, regardless of what those look like. So with the runes, that's just kind of my own personal spin on it.
Right. Right.
So a lot of the rituals incorporate rune work in some way. I also have the plant spirit glyphs, which are very similar in appearance to rune staves. And then in the upcoming book, The Poison Path Oracle, I also draw on some different poison plant rune associations that came out of, I think it was Nigel Pennick's Runes and Astrology. He did some different poison plant associations, so I incorporate those into there and then give some of my own personal commentary on why I think those associations make sense or why they don't make sense.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Um, so plants like I guess you mentioned mugwort and wormwood. Um, so I have both those plants in my garden. I use mugwort more as kind of a part of just like a nighttime tea, kind of along with chamomile and lemon balm, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, Mugwort oil, that kind of stuff. But nothing beyond kind of a kitchen tinkerer. You know, how how would you recommend I approach plants like mugwort or wormwood, in it to achieve a kind of a deeper level of communication or benefit with that plant?
There's a few different ways that you could do that. You could do like a lunar dieta, essentially. So basically, work with one plant strictly for an entire moon cycle, where you're consuming or coming into contact with some sort of a preparation of that plant, whether it's a tea or an essential oil or a smoking blend on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it helps to incorporate some kind of ritual aspect or meditation into that. And then, of course, with mugwort being such a popular herb for dream work, taking it before bed, paying attention to your dreams, any kind of communication that comes through that way. But I've known some people that have become very, very high and entered altered states of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
through working with mugwort. Burning large amounts as an
Mm-hmm.
incense or making like a stronger decoction of it because it is known for its onirogenic or dream enhancing
Mm-hmm.
capabilities. So a lot of people do take it before bed to help sleep and relax, and it does have that effect in smaller amounts, which is the case with a lot of these chemically active botanicals. In small amounts it might do one thing, but then in larger amounts it's going to do something very different, and help you really get into like that lucid dream
Mm-hmm.
state.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I'll have to have a bit more of a pop at it then.
Yeah.
I've got like a huge big jar of it from last year, like all dried. But I just have like sprinklings in a tea, really just to knock me out, to be honest, more than anything else.
Mhm.
But no, I'd like to. Your books really kind of inspired me to look at it differently now. Um, yeah. So I'd like to kind of look at the devil element with this, because you talked about kind of like the relationship between kind of like nature and the devil spirit, um, which is very apparent in witchcraft, but not always apparent to people kind of looking inward. Um, they see it very much in kind of like a satanic type thing, which it's a bit galling, but it is what it is. Um, with the plants that are associated with this spirit, like what have been your experiences in using those plants?
So those a lot of those plants are not necessarily even poisonous plants. So that's kind of demonstrating, this idea of baneful herbs. I think that there's sort of two different ideas that become misconstrued, like baneful meaning harmful or
Mm-hmm.
capable of causing harm. So we've got like our poisonous plants on one
Yeah.
end, and then we have baleful, which is like plants of woe and sinister
Right.
plants
Right.
associated with the dead. So it's more of an energetic banefulness than a physical
Sure.
danger associated with them. So that's where a lot of those plants of the devil kind of come in tapping into those more shadowy kind of energies in plants that aren't necessarily deadly or poisonous. So working with those plants is going to bring up a lot of the different aspects of the personal shadow for reflection and healing and transformation is kind of the whole idea behind why those things get brought up when we work with plants of a darker nature. So fears, anxieties, trauma, addiction, all of those things that we have very buried very very deep inside of us kind of get stirred up.
Right.
So you'll kind
Yeah.
of notice, it sort of feels like your life's starting to fall apart or you're going a little bit crazy, but it's just those things that are getting churned up. So that's why the whole idea of balance and working with some of the more beneficent herbs as well in combination with some of the more baneful ones to kind of keep yourself protected, keep that energy moving, so you can release those things, and not get
Right.
stuck in a bad place.
Right. So, like in a way, like to purge, like a kind of detoxify from that stuff. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. And do you like aside from the books, do you run like courses for people to understand how to kind of do the nature of the work that you do?
Yeah, I do online classes. I haven't done any in a little while just because I've been so busy with writing projects and everything else. But I do have a Patreon that's been running for 4 years now. So there's a whole bunch of content on there. It's
Mm.
patreon.com/poisoners apothecary. You can also check out a lot of my past recorded workshops on my YouTube channel. Again, Poisoners Apothecary. Everything up there is available for public viewing. Uh, and that's pretty much it right now. I don't have any online classes scheduled just because this has turned out to be like a really, really busy year. But I do host an annual plant spirit conference that's very focused on the poison path, psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
different ceremonial plant medicines. That happens virtually every March. It's called Botanica Obscura Conference.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. I mean, you've got a section in the book where you go through kind of formulas, you go through kind of ritual practice,
Mhm.
um, and I guess some of the more kind of renowned uses and approaches to these plants. Again, that's what I really enjoyed about this. This is that good mixture of practical. I can take this away and I can try it, with some decent instruction, but also that kind of that intro of magical context, which I kind of I think is a lovely way to kind of intro into this. There's one bit that jumped out at me in this book was we start talking about kind of vampiric plants. Could you talk to that a bit? I've never heard that expression before, so instantly jumped out to me.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a glimpse at my own personal practice too. So in addition to plants and witchcraft, I've always been very interested in and drawn to vampirism. So specifically vampiric energy work, vampiric ritual,
Mm-hmm.
energy manipulation. So the vampiric herbs kind of represent that. So it could be anything from an herb for draining and siphoning off a specific person's energy,
Mm-hmm.
in more of a defensive measure, or to actually like use that energy and direct it into a specific purpose. It could be things like glamour magic, illusion, different things like that. So anything sort of associated with the vampire mythos can be found in a lot of those herbs. But
Right,
basically, a lot of just energy manipulation.
right, right. Cool. Yeah, that was. And like, is that in your kind of Venusian kind of body, or is the glamour magic in there? Is
Yeah, I would put it in the Venusian corner. Just with the glamour magic element. Vampires are sexy, at least modern day vampires,
yeah,
not the walking corpse revenant of the early modern period.
yeah,
But what we have to remember about Venus too is that on the surface is very, very seductive and beautiful and glamorous, but then there's very much a dualistic side that can turn into that, destructive, dark goddess aspect very quickly.
Hmm.
So kind of the dancing back and forth between those two things.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. And so you mentioned you've got a third. This is your second book, and you've got a third book on the way. When is that coming out?
Mhm. The third book will be available here in the US. I believe it's April 2026.
Hmm.
So this spring, and then it should be, I think it's like 5 weeks after the US release date, it will become available in the UK and other
Right.
markets.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And you're speaking in Berlin in October, a couple of weeks after when this comes out, I think. Um, what's the what's the topic of your lecture? Poisonous plants, I assume.
Yeah, I'll be at a Culture Berlin at the end of October, so super excited for that. I'm doing a presentation called A Poisoner's Journey of Healing and Self-Discovery. So it's basically my own personal story of addiction and recovery and the role that certain plants of the poison path have played in that journey over the
Right.
years. So I'll be covering things like deadly nightshade, Amanita muscaria, kratom, foxglove, kind of showing their more healing aspects and different ways that they manifest through plant medicine ceremony, working with them as plant spirit glyphs and different ways that I've kind of incorporated them. So it's sort of a retrospective look at my own healing journey, but more
Right.
so to present the different ways that those
Hmm.
plant spirits can kind of manifest as part of that.
Fantastic. And without obviously giving away elements of your lecture, could you tell us a little bit about that? You mentioned your healing journey and plants. If you're comfortable sharing it, I understand if you don't want to go down the road.
Yeah, so I mean, it was not necessarily something that I embarked on intentionally as far as incorporating my poison path work with my recovery process. But it's just been interesting kind of looking back and seeing how different pivotal moments throughout that process have kind of lined up with some of the more profound experiences that I've had with these plants. So my drug of choice was opioids. So that's basically what I was recovering from. I was on methadone for about 8 years to try and get off of the opioids that I was addicted to for about 8 years before that. So big chunk of my life. And then finally did a medication assisted detox from the methadone, got off of that. But prior to that, had done I guess you could call it a belladonna plant medicine ceremony, where I had drank a tea that I made out of deadly nightshade or tropa belladonna, which is not something that I suggest or recommend for anyone to try at home, because it is a little bit risky and definitely an uncomfortable experience. But that was kind of what kickstarted or was the impetus not only for the work that I'm doing now as far as like really getting that out there and sharing it with the public, but also kind of coincided with like really beginning the recovery process as far as detoxing from the methadone.
Right.
So
Right.
that was kind of the big one, and then it's never recovery is just kind of the beginning of the journey. It's not so much a destination, so you're not just better all of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
sudden. um, but it kind of begins the process of unraveling all of these things that sort of led to you getting into that situation in the first place. So,
Right. 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 I see.
yeah.
Yeah. And is that like it sounds like it was that initial experience was almost like that kind of purging, like I mean I can see for how you describe that, you know why you're looking at kind of poison as a healing path, because you've been dealing with poison in some shape or form for so long. Um, that makes
Yeah, that's what I always say. I've been
yeah,
poisoning myself in one
yeah,
way or another for a very,
yeah,
very long time.
yeah. And was that initial, like, that um experience, was it one that was kind of just shock the system, like emotionally, spiritually, and physically, like a purge? You often hear about people with kind of purging from things like ayahuasca and kind of, those kind of, I mean, they kind of get a lot of stick now, but like those trips to South America for your kind of ayahuasca trip, and the purging that goes on with that. And it clearly is very healing for a lot of people. When you hear the reverse, but it is what it is. But it sounds like there was a, for where you were, in the grip of of addiction and all the kind of things that come with that, that you needed that real powerful gut punch to get it going.
hmm
Am I projecting a bit, or does that sound right? Or
Yeah, it was definitely, that's a good way to describe it, as a gut punch. Not a lot of physical purging like you would associate with something like ayahuasca,
yeah,
but definitely something that was, profound enough and very unsettling in the experience in and of itself, and then, like the days after that really kind of created an energetic shift,
right.
and was also very much like an awakening moment of like, okay, these plants are really capable of doing the things that people talk about, when they're writing about them.
Mm.
um, and then interestingly, doing more research and finding out that atropine, which is one of the main alkaloids that come from deadly nightshade, has been used to treat opiate overdose, and then also
Right.
belladonna has had some role to play in the treatment of addiction, mostly alcoholism. But when we look at the history of addiction treatment here in the US, there was something that was called the belladonna cure that they used to give alcoholics like back in the early 1900s, where they'd just basically like dose them up on deadly nightshade for a few days, and that that
Really?
helped them. So the guy that, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, the
Okay.
guy that went on to develop Alcoholics Anonymous, credited his kind of divine experience, the whole exchange that he had with God, to being under the influence of deadly nightshade. So kind of finding out that correlation too was something that was really profound. That, you talk about like looking at the practical side of things and the history and the phytochemistry, but one kind of informs the other, and that's really where like the aha moments come from, when you're able
Right.
to kind of read between the lines and see how, they're all connected.
That's astonishing. I was not aware of that at all. Really? So the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I always thought it was kind of like based on some kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like kind of chaste and puritanical, like Christian viewpoint. I'm
Mhm.
speaking from a point of ignorance, like, but that's what I assumed it was. I had no idea that they're the actual, that keystone moment of visionary sobriety came from that. That's so interesting.
Yeah,
That's really food for thought. I love it.
yeah,
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Oh,
There have actually been some more recent studies too, where they've been doing some clinical experiments on heroin addicts and using scopolamine injections. So scopolamine is also one of the main tropane alkaloids, more so associated with datura and brugmansia. But they would basically had the one group, which was, well, they were all addicted to heroin, but The one group was detoxing without anything, and then the other group was detoxing, I think maybe with methadone, and then they had given them no, maybe there was no methadone. Sorry, I'm getting my drugs mixed up. One group was treated with the scopolamine and went through the detox process, and then the other group was not treated with anything. And they found that the physical withdrawal symptoms were diminished, and then also the psychological withdrawal symptoms, which is something that lasts much longer than the physical withdrawal symptoms, were greatly diminished in the group treated with scopolamine. So they had a much, much lower incidence of relapse than the group
Right.
that was not.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of potential with the Nightshade family that we
Right.
have yet to
Explore.
unlock.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. Well, I look forward to your talk in Berlin. Are there any other areas you'd like to talk to?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. What do you want to leave it there?
Sure.
Um. Well,
I'm happy to talk about anything.
I well, I have to say, I really did it. I enjoyed your book an awful lot. I'm a very, very amateur herb person. I grow most of my own garden herbs, primarily for cooking, really. But I really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to look at some of these. Um, yeah, really good stuff. And I like how,
I'm glad you liked it.
yeah, but I also like that you've healed yourself with this. That's there's no really better um, reference point, is there? Do you know what I mean? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested. Well, before we kind of wrap up, uh, just overall to kind of get your view on. We touched on it earlier about kind of relationship between kind of the devil and nature. Um, Now, I know I don't want to kind of paint a picture that if you're in a city, you're not gonna, it's not gonna work for you. I don't know, people do people, and that, there's no absolutes in this stuff. But I have found personally, and I've associates and friends who where it's similar, that working with um some of the royal spirits, or the devil, whatever you want to call it, is easier, or the contact is easier in wilder places, in natural places. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on that.
Mm. I mean, I could see that just through the older association to the devil being
Mm.
connected to this spirit of the wilderness. But I think it could also kind of be argued that cities and more metropolitan areas are very much wilderness kind of places, untamable. Maybe not so much in the flora and fauna, but
Mm-hmm.
they're just their overall energy, the
Mm-hmm.
chaos, the consumption, the desire, the hunger, all of these very animalistic kind of energies coming together and swirling around in more populated areas. So I think that um, you're connecting maybe to a different aspect of the devil
Mm-hmm.
than you would be, if you were out in the woods somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah, I find it fascinating, and uh, I mean, really, kind of, even looking at the names of places, you get a hint of people's experiences in the past. Devil Footprint Lane, these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Tell us an awful lot about the places and the experiences that people have had historically, and how prolific this stuff is. It's literally everywhere.
Yeah, you could, I think, visit like any small town here in America, and everybody's got like a Devil's Cove or Devil's River, Devil's Cliff,
Yeah,
Devil's Bluff.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like there's not always a more kind of paranormal reason for those names, right? But some are, you know. I mean, there's a mountain ridge in County Sligo, if I remember correctly, and it's literally called Phantom Ridge. It's like its name in Irish means that, right? And it translated, it's been anglicized, like, but the original translation is exactly that, like it's like that's the place of the phantoms, this kind of stuff. You see that in kind of the etymology of a lot of place names. Like there was uh, um, a kind of a late medieval collection of books, they range a couple of centuries, called a metrical Shactus. What they were was essentially the folkloric or more mythological / folkloric history of place names in Ireland, how a place got its name,
Okay.
right? And we kind of relate to this battle happened between the Tuatha and the kind of Fomorians on this town. That's why that townland has that name, this kind of stuff. But it was all written down by monks, which
Yeah.
I love, because it's always that kind of weird marriage between kind of like Celtic Christianity, albeit was quite different to Roman Christianity. But these were Christians documenting kind of all this kind of, folkloric stuff with kind of gods, goddesses, sea demons, and all this kind of stuff, and to explain the names of all the townlands. There's
Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Anyway, so for anybody who would like to kind of find out more about you, your work, where's the best place for them to do so?
You can follow me on social media at Poisoner's Apothecary, or check out my website, thepoisonersapothecary.com.
Okay, and you mentioned you have a Patreon.
Yeah. Yep.
Great stuff. Okay, can you send me the links to all that, or it might be in your email actually,
Yeah.
and I will post that in the show notes. Well, Coby, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on Spirit Books.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing you in person in Berlin in a few
Yeah,
weeks.
likewise. That's cool.
I'll be jet lagged, but I'll be there.
Cool. Wonderful stuff. I hope you all enjoyed that. Those of you on the Patreon are more than aware of how much I kind of love plants and plant medicine and working with plants. So yeah, this is a really interesting one, and it's a very nice addition to anybody's collection who's interested in this kind of magic, this kind of magical practice. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm Dara Mason. You've been listening to Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.